My name is Harriet Nartey. I am a journalist and I host Diplomatic Affairs on Pan-African television, and it also streams live on social media here, and I'm going to be doing that with my co-moderator Tim, and Tim can't wait to begin his conversation with you. So once again, I want to say welcome to the St. Gallen Symposium, which is being held at the residence of the Swiss Ambassador to Ghana, His Excellency Philip Stalder. I think we have Mr. Franklin Cudjoe, who is the founder of the IMANI Center for Policy and Education. And we also have Simon Aseno, who is the founder of Afro Technologies and People's Foundation for Health and Education Development. Welcome. And we have Dr. Patrick Awuah, the founder and president of Ashesi University. Thank you very much for coming. And of course, the only lady who is with us today is Aisha Addo, the founder of Power to Girls Foundation. It's a pleasure having you once again. And we have Tim Segessemann. I hope I got the name right. Yeah. So Tim will be my co-moderator for today's event. And like I said, he has a lot to share. So without taking too much of his time, I know you are ready to continue from here, right?
Thank you, Harriet. And yes, also from my side, it's a pleasure to welcome you all to the Swiss Ambassador's residence here in Accra on behalf of Ambassador Philip Stalder, who sends his regards. And now, before our panelists introduce themselves, I would like to say a few words about why we are all here today hosting this event at the Swiss Embassy on behalf of the St. Gallen Symposium. This year, as you might know, the Swiss government has for the very first time formulated a strategy for Sub-Saharan Africa. So it outlines thematic and geographical priorities, objectives and measures for the next 4 years. So why such a strategy, and why now for Sub-Saharan Africa, you might ask? Well, firstly, Switzerland already has well-established ties with Sub-Saharan Africa in view of its geographical proximity, cultural richness, and economic potential. And so therefore, the goal is to highlight and consolidate the diversity of the ties already existing today. For just one example, we have had just last year the historic state visit of the President of Ghana, Addo, to Switzerland, as we celebrated 60 years of our diplomatic ties between our two countries. And this strategy is actually, and we are very proud to say this, the result of a very broad-based consultation process. So diplomatic representations of over 30 African states actually came together in Switzerland last year to actively participate in shaping it. And so this document itself is, in a way, an expression of the genuine partnership that we have. Secondly, and looking ahead, the strategy also recognizes that the region is becoming increasingly important on the world stage. New opportunities are emerging in Africa in various policy fields, such as foreign economic policy, digitalization, science diplomacy, and multilateralism. But most of all, I think when we talk about opportunities, we need to talk not just about policy, but people. And we need to keep in mind, Sub-Saharan Africa is the world's fastest growing region. There is no population as young as that of Sub-Saharan Africa. And so there are many young, energetic, well-connected young men and women who are ready to achieve progress. So their inclusion in development opportunities and into decision-making processes is a central consideration as we go forward. And that they are to be the protagonists as the story continues, I think we can all agree is evident. And I believe not just if we give a cursory glance at the cover of our strategy, we know who will be in the lead. And this brings us to today's event. We are celebrating today the 50th anniversary of the St. Gallen Symposium. At one of Europe's leading business schools, it has developed into the world's premier gathering for cross-generational exchange between the leaders of today and the leaders of tomorrow. So this year is a special one. And under the title Trust Matters, various Swiss embassies are bringing the symposium around the globe. And this is a great opportunity for us to bring Accra to St. Gallen, to Switzerland, and the world stage. And I am particularly proud of the fact that we have 3 former leaders of tomorrow of the St. Gallen Symposium among our panelists who will share their SGS story with us. And this just in, actually, we are also proud to have secured the support of the Secretary General of the African Continental Free Trade Area, who has prepared the following statement, which I will share with you now. The Secretary General, Wankele Mene, tells us, trust matters in trade. It is the cornerstone of implementing the African Continental Free Trade Area successfully. And as Secretary General of the African Continental Free Trade Area, I therefore support the St. Gallen Symposium and the Embassy of Switzerland in Accra to promote dialogue amongst generations, to strengthen mutual trust as we work together to pursue opportunities and address global challenges. And I think this should amply motivate us to get into the thick of things. And so I'm excited now, together with our panelists, to explore how dialogue between generations and across borders informs their work here in Ghana and beyond, and what opportunities that they see ahead. So now, let's hear from them.
At this point, our panel, all of them are going to be given 5 minutes each for the presentation. So I think I will start with Mr. Franklin Cudjoe to give us his presentation, his work and what he does and all of it. We are interested.
Well, thank you very much, Harriet. Thank you very much, team. Good to meet you, my good friends. Patrick, it's been a while. Good to know that you're here, and along with my 2 young collaborators. I call them collaborators because we've been future leaders, right? We were future leaders, and now we are still future leaders. Let me say that my story of St. Gallen is one that is quite interesting, and it resonates with the moniker of St. Gallen, which essentially is where aspirations get inspired. Back in 2001, had always thought of being a thought leader in public policy. And so while I was learning estate management, or what you call land economy, I had a lot of interest in global affairs, and I used to write on the school's editorial boards and what have you. And I think one student noticed my writing and thought that the interest was quite very appealing to people. And he had seen the advert for the application for the St. Gallen Symposium, and so just days before the deadline. In fact, he walked through the rain to come and hand me the notice of application, and I had 1 day to prepare for the entry. So you would have understood why that was of interest to him and myself. So I gathered my thoughts. I think the topic at the time, this was 2001, the topic at the time was the new balance of power. I gathered my thoughts, and I thought that Africa could still have a table, even though at the time we were just on the cusp of recovery from the bad old ways of managing various economies. And so I put my thoughts together, and I was selected. I mean, I look upon it with pride right now, to think that I had just prepared just a whole day to get into it. But it was interesting. I met a lot of people in St. Gallen who helped shape my thoughts. Don't forget, I was a libertarian at the time, but didn't know quite much that there were a lot of libertarian thought leaders around the world. I mean, as Africans, we're socialists at heart, but capitalists in practice. And I was one of those who believed firmly in the ideas of the free world. But of course, while meeting students in St. Gallen, my views got shaped. I met people who had already done a lot of readings in libertarian philosophy, just to cement what I already knew, and somehow also resonated with my idealistic, if you like, inspired fight for liberating the African mind, even while I was that young. And so many things came to basically into fruition. And after school, I thought maybe while almost 2/3 of my classmates were thinking about going abroad to go and do something for themselves, I thought I could stay back and help change the thinking on the continent. And I think after almost 16 years, I'm not sure I was wrong. I think I formed, together with my friends at IMANI, one of the most influential think tanks on the continent and in the world. We were almost in the top 10 for almost the past 8 years on the continent, and in the top 150 think tanks globally. I think to cement all these interesting relationships with Switzerland, we had the honor of hosting the former Swiss president in 2017 to discuss ideas that propel the world. And I think that's just a bit of my St. Gallen story.
So yes, now I think we will hand over for the next presentation to Simon. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. So my first encounter with the St. Gallen Symposium was in 2017. I was then a graduate student at the University of Johannesburg, and the symposium organizers, the International Student Committee, had a team of students who would come to South Africa on a roadshow to advertise the program. So that was my first time of hearing about it. And I come from a very strong science and health background, but I love international politics and global affairs. I think there's something probably common between the two of us. And so I set out to, the team in 2017 was the dilemma of disruption, and I set out to make proposals for UN Security Council reform. And so I wrote my essay along those lines, and I challenged the status quo and thought that there was the need for us to consider other factors and actually reform the UN Security Council, given the fact that Africa, being the largest continent, being one of the, the countries with largest representation at the United Nations General Assembly, doesn't have a permanent seat at the UN Security Council. And that, for me, is unacceptable. If we actually truly are, if the UN actually is a global organization that has respect for equality, then Africa surely deserves a permanent seat at the UN Security Council. And so I think that essay probably caught the eyes of the panel, and I was selected among the top 100 in 2017 to participate in the St. Gallen Symposium. Thereafter, before I finished my studies, I was so fortunate that Patrick was invited to speak to my scholarship cohort in Cape Town, and he came to talk to us about the state of Africa, and he gave a story of how he was in the United States and then what motivated him to come back to Ghana. And then I drew a lot of inspiration from him and said, look, after my studies, I'm not staying here, I'm coming back to Ghana. So I returned to Ghana, and I also, derived some inspiration from the St. Gallen Symposium, and I started the People's Foundation for Health and Education Development. So I had been doing this while doing other things. When in 2019 they organized the 49th St. Gallen Symposium on the theme of Capital for Purpose, and I was invited back again, this time as an alumnus. And so that was where I met Aisha Addo, and we were the only 2 Ghanaians, and I think about 5 Africans who were at the symposium. Since I returned to Ghana, I've also been able to host my host, who hosted me in St. Gallen, and he visited me in 2018, and we explored a lot of themes and hopeful that we would have an exciting future in terms of business and investments.
Dr. Patrick Awuah also has a very interesting story. I spent some time watching your clip on YouTube, and I couldn't stop watching it. So please share that with us.
Well, so yes, my story I think is the one I shared with you when I was visiting South Africa. You know, I grew up in Ghana. I'm Ghanaian. I went through high school here and then went to college in the United States to study engineering. And after that, went to work at Microsoft Corporation, working in high tech and big tech. The reason I decided to return to Ghana was that when my first child was born, my focus suddenly switched to the next generation. It's just, okay, there's another generation coming. What does the world look like for them? What do we want the world to look like for them? And for me, the answer was that we needed a world where Africa was an equal partner in the world. And we needed a lot more development on the continent. And so I decided to return to help with development in some way. And I chose higher education as the thing to do, even though, you know, the natural thing would have been to set up a software company here. But I decided to do higher education because higher education is where we groom the leaders of society. Higher education is also the place where we have the conversations about what the good society is, what do we want our society to look like, where we do invention, where we work on policy advice for governments and the roadmaps for our country and our society. And it seemed to me that if I could engage there, then I would have a multiplier effect in what I do. I also chose higher education because I felt that my experience with higher education in the United States, where there's a very strong emphasis on critical thinking and creativity and problem solving, was missing here. Here, education is very rote-based, just memorizing facts. And I wanted to bring this model of not just about memorizing facts, but being creative. And we also decided, my team and I, that central to whatever we did would have to be a very strong focus on ethics, because societies move forward when you have ethical leaders, when you have trust. So this is a theme in this symposium, the importance of trust. And societies really do move at the speed of trust. A society that has very low trust, very low social capital, finds it very difficult for people to get together and do important things and do big things. Whereas a society that has trust has people working together and doing really important things. And so that is very central to everything we do at Ashesi. And that's why I'm here. I don't have a St. Gallen story, but I do have a Swiss story. We just recently started a partnership with ETH Zurich to develop a master's in mechatronics at Ashesi University. And we just got news yesterday from the accreditation authorities in Ghana that that program has been approved. So we're going to move full speed ahead with that. So we're very interested in these kinds of partnerships beyond Ghana's borders as well.
Yeah, thank you very much, Patrick. And yes, also thank you for sharing your very exciting story, and obviously also highlighting the Swiss link, your relationship and your work, and we'll definitely delve more into that as we go along. And so now over to the lady on my left, Aisha.
No pressure at all.
Oh, we've been looking forward to your talk. So please, floor is yours.
Wow, thank you so much. First off, for creating the space, and to the St. Gallen Symposium for allowing all of us to have a St. Gallen story and also a Swiss story. My name is Aisha Addo, and I am a social entrepreneur. And my St. Gallen story really just started with me doing what I love to do and enjoying what I do, and that is really creating safe spaces for girls and women. So I believe it was in 2018. Funny enough, I had just applied to a fellowship in Toronto, and they had sent me an email saying that I didn't make the cut. So I was really upset about that. And then a couple of weeks later, the lady that interviewed me sent me an email saying, hey, there's this program called the St. Gallen Symposium, and I just nominated you as the leader of tomorrow. And I'm like, well, you couldn't nominate me to become a city fellow. You know, so I was a bit upset about that, but I sent her an email and said, thank you so very much for thinking about me. And literally 2 days later, I got an email from St. Gallen asking me to be a leader of tomorrow. It was very interesting because first off, I had never heard of the St. Gallen Symposium until then. But then what ended up happening after the symposium and the relationships that I've been able to build after the symposium is actually one of the things that keeps me talking about the St. Gallen Symposium after I left. I was able to actually connect with someone in Canada that shared their experience with me as being a leader of tomorrow. And I think for me, one of the key things, because when I went to the symposium, the theme, as Simon shared, was Capital for Purpose. And as a social entrepreneur, that's something that had always been at the forefront of my mind in terms of how can we actually create social changes with the capital that we get. And, you know, you mentioned it earlier on around, you know, Africans specifically being socialists at heart, but capitalists, you know, in action. And for me, it really was a matter of how are we creating spaces that allowed for folks, regardless of where they're coming from, regardless from their gender, to be able to make use of some of the capital that was coming in. At that time, I was also running a tech startup. So I was also looking at really how can we repurpose all the capital that comes in, you know, different forms and in different industries to support social activities and to support social good. So that essentially was how my journey with St. Gallen started. After the symposium, I've been able to keep in touch with actually majority of the leaders of tomorrow that I was able to connect with. And the beautiful thing about St. Gallen, I would say, is the people that you get to meet and the different stories that you're able to hear. Because I met someone that was from England that was the youngest millionaire in UK that was running you know, a real estate startup. And there was just so many different people. And I think what really stood out to me was the opportunity to connect with not only leaders of tomorrow, but leaders of today. And that connection and that intergenerational learning that we got from the symposium that we continue to get. I've been engaged with the symposium ever since, and you know, I'm really excited to be back here and to actually explore this conversation around trust, because I think it really puts a lid, it actually allows for us to explore more this intergenerational connection that St. Gallen is used to and is known for.
And one thing I drew from your presentations is networking, which is crucial in our lives. The people you meet can actually change your way of thinking. They can inspire you to be better. And if you don't meet the right people, then we all know what could happen. And so it is important for us to create the platform. That's one thing I like about today's agenda, the fact that we are creating the platform to link, you know, the current leaders and then tomorrow's leaders together to share ideas and look at how best we can make the world a better place for all of us and generations to come. I think is amazing. I won't waste time at all. Now I'm going to go straight to our question, Q&As, right, where we begin. And I'm looking forward to this one. So I will start with, or Tim, do you have something you want to share with us before I proceed?
All to you.
All right, great. So with your permission, I think I will start with Aisha Addo. And my question to you is, how do you promote female role models and make sure they have a seat at the table?
Yeah, that's my all-time favorite question to get. And it's because my entire career has been set on creating safe spaces for girls and women, and to ensure that the voices of the girls that I get the opportunity to work with are amplified in all areas. One of the key things, and I think this is actually something that, again, like, not only am I passionate about, but this is an issue that we are always looking to solve, and that is the importance of mentorship and sponsorship in a way. The reason why I share that is because a lot of times what we don't realize is that you cannot be what you do not see, right? And you talked about networking, which I think is really vital and important as well. But for me, the key thing is also around representation. A lot of times, for young girls, let's say young girls that are in Ghana, or young girls that, black and marginalized girls that are in Canada or in different parts of the world, they might not necessarily get the opportunity to see women in higher positions. This is not to say that these people are not there or they're non-existent, they are there, but then this, the idea of, you know, coming back is not something that we emphasize on a lot. So for me, my work is really centered around how do we ensure that girls are seeing people that look like them and are seeing that role models that they need. But then more importantly, how are institutions creating opportunities and creating spaces for these girls to actually aspire to be. So a perfect example is, you know, now we are in this era where everyone is talking about STEM. I'll say STEAM because we want to include the arts. And you know, the downside in this is that we're not engaging the next generation of people that are actually going to be creating the technologies that we're going to be using, or the people that are actually going to be innovating on the things that we've already created. And I think it's always important when, you know, folks talk about STEM, or they talk about education, or they talk about any sector for that matter, to think about the people that are coming after them. I always share this, that the policies and stuff that we are putting in place now is not going to be used by us. It's going to be used by the ones that are after us. So if we're not creating the spaces that allows for them to see these people, or we're not creating the spaces that allows for them to feel like they can be in these spaces, then what are we really doing? The last thing that I'll add is, and this is actually something that a project that I did here. So my organization works in Ghana as well. And, you know, a couple of years ago, we did a program where I was asking the girls what they aspired to be, and these are young girls in Ghana. So in a class of 60 girls, everyone went around and I asked, okay, so what do you want to be? And the answers were a bit disheartening because, and it's not disheartening because of the fields that they chose. It was disheartening because, again, when I asked why, the answer was always because I've never seen a female police officer before. I have never seen a female doctor before. I have never seen a female engineer before. So this is not something that I think I can do. So these were the answers that instead I got. I want to be a housewife. I want to be a nurse, and not to say that there's anything wrong with being a nurse. You know, I want to be a trader, not to say there's anything wrong with being a trader. But the options were so limited because of what they've been exposed to. So when we talk about representation and we talk about role models and we talk about creating safe spaces, these are some of the things that we have to think about. How we engage in the next generation, or even better yet, think about your little sister, your little daughter, you know, your neighbor's daughter. How are you creating a world that is going to be accepting of her and the choices that she decides to make for herself? Or better yet, are you living a life that is allowing her to look at you and say, you know what, she excelled in this space, so I know for a fact that I can. So yeah, that's essentially what I would say to that question.
Great. Tim.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Aisha, and I think this launches the discussion very nicely. And if I may, you know, I will take up this point and maybe forward it directly to Patrick. You know, you as someone who has founded a university, is an educator and has constant contact with young people, with the leaders of tomorrow here in Ghana. How important are these considerations that Aisha has brought up? So to you know, to give women, especially, new perspectives. How essential is that in your work at Ashesi?
It's very important to us, and it's important enough that it is one of our key performance indicators that we track every year to see how we're doing on gender balance at our institution. But I would say that beyond gender, I think the broader term that is really important is diversity and inclusion of people. So it's gender, it's religion, it's different abilities. So do you have, you know, make sure that people who are physically disabled have easy access to your facilities. It's inclusion in the sense that people should feel welcome. Mm-hmm. They should feel like they belong. So it doesn't matter if you grew up in a rural village or in a very nice urban area, you should feel like you belong on this campus equally with everybody. And so we have these specific metrics that we measure. We have scholarships that we apply to achieve our goals. And it's very deep with us. So it's interesting you mentioned STEM. We have a program during our summer break where we invite high school kids to come and learn engineering and robotics and entrepreneurship on our campus. And it's for high school kids. We make sure very strictly it's 50% girls, 50% boys. We don't waver from that. And we make them work in teams where there's equal numbers of boys and girls, designing and building machines and programming them together, and having everybody see that they're equally able. And for us, the result is if you come to Ashesi, you'll find that there's gender parity everywhere. You know, the board of directors is actually now majority women. It's, I think, 55% of our board are women. My executive team is 50% women. If you look at the middle management team, it's equally men and women on the faculty. And it all comes from stating very clearly for your organization that this is important. So people pay attention, measuring how you're doing. But it's also things like, you know, when you put out a job description, the language you put in that job description matters. If you put out, you know, a brochure on engineering, the language you use matters. If I put out a brochure to high schools that talks about machines, this is very exciting to the boys, but not to the girls. Mm-hmm. But if I talk about using technology to solve problems for society, that is very interesting to the girls, right? And so making sure that the language that you use is paying attention. If you put out a job description and you say the person must have 15 years of experience, well, now you've created a generational divide. And the fact is, for say my parents' generation, it's not so equal between men and women. For my generation, it's a little better. For the generation behind us, it's a little better. So what if I didn't put that 15-year requirement? Now women who may be in a more recent generation can apply. Mm-hmm. And you'll get a chance to evaluate people just based on their capabilities, not how much time they've spent in something, right? So these sorts of things are really important, but it all starts from the leadership saying that this is important, communicating it very clearly to everybody, saying this matters, and tracking how you're doing on it. And again, be as broad as possible. I think, for example, every company should have some positions for people who have learning disabilities, just so you have those different abilities in your organization, and you should give them the same level of medical insurance as everybody else. They should feel that they belong, all of that. And when you create that, then all of this other stuff falls out.
Now, Mr. Cudjoe, let me ask you this question, though. When it comes to education and gender, what do you make of the policies that we put in place?
Well, that's a very interesting and difficult question as well. I'm sure Patrick knows that the education is a subject that in this part of our world, people make fetish of. I mean, it's as clear as daylight and darkness. In terms of the things that ought to be done. And we have been at pains at our institute to communicate the fact that there are, you know, seamless ways of exacting, you know, proper outcomes if you did what others are doing quite well. I call them copying the habits of the highly effective countries. And even beyond going to talk about countries, we have even examples even in this country. Patrick runs a very well-known university, and I've seen his handiwork. Everybody has seen his handiwork. we can begin to copy and learn from the likes of Patrick. You know, I started off by giving the examples because oftentimes when we try to mirror what happens elsewhere as a way of showing how to do things right, we are accused of externalizing our brains and in some regard being imposters for neo-colonialists. But I've always wondered, what is it about free high school education that cannot be managed in such a way that it grows with a country, where you can say, for instance, that look, in order to maximize access for young girls, you need to ensure that the little that comes in by way of revenue, which is applied to education, should be tiered so that those who could afford to pay for higher secondary school education would pay, and those who cannot pay then shepherded through the process by the proceeds, the little from the kitty. How is this difficult to understand? I don't get it. We had meetings with the current president before he became president when we were talking about this policy. He asked us for his advice, and we told him, look, the best way for this to succeed is to ensure that you do a tiered, you organize it in a tiered format, if indeed your goal is to ensure that a lot more people are covered. But anyway, that conversation has traveled a while now, and I think the chickens have come home to roost. Didn't I hear recently that the education minister, who I'm meeting on Friday, by the way, to talk about education, was telling people that, look, basically saying, I'm tired of hearing that people want to pay or allow people to pay. He said, if you wish to pay, go to the school and tell the school headmaster, headmistress that I like to pay for my ward. That sounded like being snobbish, but I think it was quite categorical, and I liked his frankness. I think there's also the finance minister who did say, after looking at the computer forlornly and looking at the revenues that were not coming, and realized that we were spending a significant amount on education, said on a TV program that, look, he thinks that people who could afford to pay should actually pay. I'm using this as an example of how difficult it is to have conversations about public policy in this part of our world. And indeed, if all the things Aisha and Patrick have mentioned about gender and inclusivity are to be solved, are to be attended to, then we need to start looking at spaces where we can make, savings in order to broaden access for everybody. I hear the lack of attention given to STEAM, and I'm worried. And I suspect that if we manage our affairs a little bit better, if we're having proper conversations with stakeholders, the politicians, parents, as well as people, anybody who has a stake in our destiny, I'm sure we'll get to that, we'll cross that bridge. But oftentimes, politics in this part of our world is so rancorous that it becomes very difficult to allow, sane minds to, prevail over high-octane spin, which usually is the case. So it's a difficult environment, but I think we are trying.
I have a follow-up comment on that. I think that even when there's a desire to address gender, sometimes we do things that end up making it a tokenism, right? So there's a recent law, there's a proposal to pass a new law for universities, public universities. And this law generated a lot of debate about how many members of university boards the president of Ghana would select, right? And I think it's something like 4 or 5 people would be selected by the president. And everybody was in an uproar about this. They thought he should have fewer members, right? However, for me, when I read that, what immediately jumped out to me was 4 or 5 people, one of whom will be a woman. And the question in my mind was, why 1? Why not 2? 2 out of 4 Or why not say at least one of whom might be a woman or a man, so that you actually give the opportunity to have 75% women in some years as well. So, but it's just that kind of thing that really drives home the point of how difficult this is. It has to be really deeply embedded in our psyche that we want to be equal, right? Then you'll have the laws actually really push for equality, right?
But it's not even about, sorry, I just want to mention this, is that the conversation is not about equality, and I think you mentioned it beautiful.
Yeah.
The conversation is about equity. And
Yes.
equity means that you're not actually creating barriers that is allowing for folks to feel othered, right? And even more so, freedom. And freedom means that you're giving people the liberty, you're allowing people to come as they are, and you're not restricting them or putting policies in place just based off of their gender, their abilities, and all of those different things. So I always like to, you know, make that distinction that equality would mean that, yes, you can do 2 and 2, but then in retrospect, that is not necessarily creating a diverse or inclusive space, as you mentioned earlier.
Right.
But if you're thinking about equity, then you're thinking about it as, you know, how am I making sure that not only is, you know, Mr. Patrick safe and, you know, able to bring their full selves, but then everyone else here is doing the same thing. So I really want us to have that in mind. If we're able to change that from equality to equity, we'll actually be able to make progress.
Yep.
Yeah, I think this is a very interesting point, how we brought this out, you know, the desire for inclusion and representation, how we encounter difficulties in policy, in implementing it, as you rightly pointed out. So I want to take this idea further and maybe play it over to Simon on the question of, well, you know, if we have these desires to further equity, you yourself, Simon, you are very much active on a community level with your foundation, and you talk a lot about how important it is to first gain people's trust on the ground, to give them also the confidence that they can step up and feel that they will be included. So I'm wondering, now breaking it down on the community level, how do you build trust on the local level in your work?
So, Tim, let me be very straightforward. Transparency breeds trust, and trust is earned. It's not a donation. People don't donate trust. You have to earn trust. And so I work as a community lead at Zipline, and the strategy has been to be stubbornly transparent with what we do. We have consciously made sure that communities are able to have access to the distribution centers that are set across the country. And because we are also data-driven, we ensure that when people get into our operational areas, they do find the information actually on dashboards at the distribution center in terms of the number of flights that we've made, the number of deliveries, if you want to, you know, fragment them into vaccines and blood and what have you. And so this has endeared us to the community because community members feel that there is nothing that we are hiding from them. And also when we organize these you know, site visits for key stakeholders and community members, we've been strategic in including underrepresented groups, like maybe peoples who live with disabilities. We've supported with transportation to get them to the distribution center. We invite chiefs also, and where people are skeptical about some things, I think when we're coming in, there were fears that probably the technology might be used for surveillance or espionage. And so people who have an engineering background come, they look at our drones, you know, we disassemble everything, and everyone practically sees today that there's nothing like a camera even on the drone probably to see what's happening in when it is en route to deliver medical products to a health facility. Second to that is having community participation at the very outset of your program. And so with regards to where we've cited our distribution centers in the, across the country, communities have had a say. We go talk with local people, we go talk with the local government people. We say, okay, these are the technical reasons we consider in citing a distribution center. And from our survey, these are the sites where, you know, it will be suitable and community members choose that, okay, we don't want your distribution center to be located here, we want it to be located over there. And we take that feedback into consideration. And so community members feel that they are part of the Fly to Save a Life project from the very time that we're getting into the community where we come into probably be their neighbors. And thirdly, is in gathering feedback and continuously improving with that feedback. So we continuously engage communities to find out, look, there's a flight route along this community. Are you comfortable with it? They're like, yeah, we find school kids see the drones pass by, they see the lights at night, it excites them, it boosts their aspirations to get into STEM. And when we're developing STEM programs at schools, schools have a say in what STEM program that we are developing and implementing, and schools also agree with us with respect to how we should probably roll out the STEM program. And so we've been doing the STEM project at schools as a corporate social responsibility. So for me, Tim, 3 things. 1, you need to be transparent. And 2, you need to have community involvement. And 3, you need to continuously gather feedback from the communities and actually continuously improve and let them see that the feedback that you gathered from them was not cosmetic, but actually was going to be used to improve the services that you provide in them. So you don't take the community members as beneficiaries and that is it. We just fly in medical products to you and that is it. And so I think that this, for any organization to be successful at the community level, these 3 factors would actually be very useful.
Now, Mr. Cudjoe, let me go straight to my question. Why do we think trust has eroded when it comes to business between the younger generation and the current leaders of the world?
You know, not long ago, a UN rapporteur was sent to come and scan the governance systems in the country. He had just 2 weeks to give his verdict. And I think I'll just summarize what he said. He said the politicians have created for themselves a sloganeering society. And essentially what it meant was that there was a deep divide between the haves and the haves-nots. And that gulf was widening at frightening speed and light. And I think when he mentioned the issues around sloganeering development, I wasn't surprised, or we at IMANI weren't surprised, because we've always said it, that we've always had it at the back of our minds that when designing policies, the least the politician of today, not even just today, probably 3 decades back, think about is actually the people. Just take a cursory look at almost all the manifestos in this 4th Republican dispensation. And you have a situation where the ideas, these are dreams, actually I call them wet dreams, that are collected into a document and then, you know, campaigned vigorously. You would have thought that the campaign would mean that people who are shouting on bandwagons and on the political train actually understand the policy. They do not. So it's tokenism, you know, we'll do this, we'll do that. I mean, the last of what we've heard was actually before that. We had some politicians in, I think, the year 2008 suggesting that one said his agriculture policy was going to grow sufficient donkeys in the northern part of the country and use the excreta as fertilizer. Another said he was going to construct a pipeline from the oil fields all the way to the north as a result, as a means of ensuring equity or equal access to the wealth from oil. Yet another said he was going to generate electricity by suspending permanent magnets into the atmosphere. Now, it shocked me when we took a casual look at the policies. But there was one person who stood out at the time. There was a politician who was famously called domestication. He hadn't worked out the math, but I think when we worked out the math of all the things he wanted to achieve within 4 years, you would have grown the economy to the tune of $840 billion annually. And that would have meant that the Ghanaian economy was going to be probably the 7th richest after the UK. So it was going to grow an economy almost 2.4 trillion US dollars. But he had no clue as to how he was going to get there. We just found a way of calculating all of this. Recently, a politician said he was going to ensure that the almond economy was given a new breath of life. It was going to grow 2 million almond trees, actually 1.2 million almond trees, and as a result, build a $300 billion economy for Ghana. When we drilled down the promise, we drilled into the promise, we realized that even the world's richest almond producer was making $5.2 billion a year. Now, how it was the case that the politician sat together with his unit heads in terms of people who were thinking agriculture or whatever policy, and came to this rather fantastic figure was surprising, was quite surprising. But you see, it permeates almost every facet of our lives. Recently, the president has been heckled for suggesting, I think a year and a half ago, that by yesterday, or as of yesterday or 2 days ago, it was going to begin the construction of 81 hospitals. But these were things that were heard during the campaign. Just as we had one district, one factory. Not that it's bad. These things are not necessarily bad in themselves. But whenever they've been designed, someone in the village, my grandmother in the village, possibly is the last person that is thought of. So it's whimsical, it is convenient, and totally has no connection to the budgetary allocations of any country, or at a point in time, the budgetary allocations in the year. So it's a straightforward question to answer. The issues about trust between politicians, what politicians or political managers say or intend to do, as is what they actually plan to do, because their thinking is most often sacrificed on the altar of politics.
So let me take up this theme of political promises and promises that is offered by institution. And we've heard at the beginning the supporting statement by the Secretary General of the African Continental Free Trade Area. And that, of course, is an institution which is now being implemented that offers for many a lot of promise. And I want to maybe adapt the idea of that, not in terms of trade, but in terms of education, and bring it back to an idea that you raised, Patrick, at the beginning in your introduction, which is that you've been successful in building partnerships with institutions around the world. You've mentioned the partnership with the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology, ETH, in Zurich. And I'm just wondering, do you see a parallel in education, that you want to focus more on partnerships within Africa, now that we see in trade the example of AFCEFTA? Is that something that you consider an interesting or a vital idea going forward, to focus back?
We think that it's very important, and in fact we've already started to do that. So about 4 years ago we set up a collaborative of African universities that convene once a year to share ideas on, pedagogy, on making sure that students can get placed in jobs, thinking through university administration and all of that. Over 200 universities have participated in this collaborative, and 100 of them are repeat participants. So it's, that's a start. I think that we need to do a lot more. One of the things that I'm hoping will emerge out of this collaborative that we've established is that we'll also start to look at collaborative research with each other, but also start to look at how do we measure our performance and rank our performance to guide us to do what is important and necessary for Africa. So if you look at university rankings around the world, if you look at all the regions in the world, We all look at these global research rankings, you know, Times Higher Ed and so on, Shanghai. But every region except Africa also has regional rankings, in some cases national rankings, which are measuring things beyond research. They're measuring job placement. They're measuring the, they're measuring innovation and other things that are really important, quantitative and qualitative measures of the quality of teaching. We don't do that in Africa, and so all that we look at are these research rankings, and there's only one university in Africa that's in the top 500 globally, which is University of Cape Town. And it's not sufficient. We need to be delving into more detail. And so this is something also that we're working on with other universities to try and establish on the continent.
Aisha, Addo, your final words.
One last thing that I'll say, and I think this is in relation to actually everything that was said earlier, is that, you know, every time we're talking about creating stuff for other folks, we never really take into consideration the people. So having in mind that your beneficiaries are not just your beneficiaries, and until, like, you know, from a political standpoint, one of the key things that I see in Ghana is that we do not educate our own people on policies, on the things that are actually available to them, or actually what the role of government is. And I think that is one of the things that we don't talk about enough, is because if you're able to provide a transparent education and actually understanding of what government is supposed to do, what policies are supposed to be in place, and all these different things, some of the things that we're talking about would, you know, be solved. So that's just like my final thoughts on everything.
Patrick Awuah, please share your final words with us.
Well, I would just say I completely agree. You know, the statement that the theme says is absolutely true. The trust is very important. I think that there's a lot of work to be done. And if I had to just summarize just some very important points, I would just say that it takes courage to achieve anything significant, and it takes effort to achieve anything significant, whether it is building a high-trust society, developing ethical leaders, paying attention to diversity and inclusion, making the right policies, getting feedback. All of the things we've talked about require significant effort, and they require significant courage. And we have to sort of move forward with this sense of optimism that we can, in fact, achieve these things.
Simon?
And so if we're talking about trust, indeed trust matters, and Ghana and beyond. So I would like rather to share my expectations of the Ghana, the future of Ghana that I want to see, that the time that we as leaders of tomorrow become leaders, the type of Ghana that I want to see in the context of trust. And it borders around whether we can trust that when it is our time, we can inherit a green economy, whether we're paying attention to climate change. And these are the things that I want to challenge leaders of today to start looking at, that by the time that it is our turn to become leaders, we have an economy that would not be ravaged by the climate plague that we're facing at the moment.
Mr. Cudjoe.
Well, Simon, money is important, but money is not everything. And so, unfortunately, someone said, I think it was Donald Kaberuka, the former ADB boss, who said that you can have lots of money, and indeed, if you want to attract debt, you can attract debt like iceberg. But at the end of the day, it is the quality of the policies that you make, the soundness of the decisions that come with these monies, that ultimately would instill the very trust that you want to earn from the people. And I think there are offshoots of trust, really. And I like to borrow the terminology from the Singaporeans as well. And these offshoots of trust are essentially meritocracy, pragmatism, and honesty, especially in public office. I think these are vital ingredients for growing a Ghana beyond aid, and a Ghana that earns trust among its peers.
Thank you to all our panelists, and I can say nothing but that I look really forward to the next St. Gallen Symposium, and who knows, maybe we will have you back for number 51. It seems to be going strong, and this panel has shown to me what a dialogue amongst the generations can be at its best. Thank you very much.